If you have lost an infant to sudden infant death syndrome or SIDS, it is not your fault.
It happens even when you take all precautions. My doctor told me, even if she was here in the hospital and I was right there, I wouldn't have been able to save. There's nothing that any parent can do. I would say parents need to find their space to express their grief, not let it kill them from inside.
There are losses that can be seen and named, and then there are losses so quiet, so invisible to the world, that even those who carry that grief often do so in complete silence. Today's conversation is about one such loss, the loss of an infant. And joining me on Zen-Brain is Bharti Mohan, who's a researcher, a clinical psychologist, and mother who lost her daughter Arushi when she was just 16 days old to sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS as it's known as, which is a leading cause of death for infants under 1 year. In India, according to stats from 2019, and I want to read it out here, 32 deaths per 1,000 births. That's how common it really is. So back to Bharti. 19 years later, after losing Arushi, she continues to live in Bharti's world, not just as a long lost memory, but as a strong presence, which also led to Bharti's PhD thesis. She's spoken to several other grieving parents, mostly mothers, but also fathers, with empathy that only someone who has been through a similar experience can have. So, this is a conversation for anyone who has experienced the loss of an infant. I invite you to listen with your heart. Thank you, Bharti, for joining me on Zen Brain.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for having me.
Bharti, I want to take you back. What really happened the day you lost Arushi?
It was early morning. I was very uncomfortable. It was Diwali night, and the next morning she died. So I didn't want to expose her to firecracker pollution, so I didn't want to take her out at all. But there was a discomfort, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I had a feeling that something's going to go wrong. And I woke up in the morning to go to the washroom so that then I can feed her. But I just happened to turn around and I just knew that she's not breathing. My worst fear came true.
What do you have to say to parents who have lost an infant, especially to SIDS?
In India, I find that, especially if it's a girl child that you lose, after birth or even during the pregnancy, if it's a girl child, it's not mourned. And I hated hearing that as a mother also. It's almost like, oh, it was just a girl. It wasn't just a girl, it was my girl, a very precious girl. I named her Arushi, which means the first ray of sunshine. She was like that, and she still remains like that for me. Through her and her loss and my PhD work, I feel I've helped other people understand and acknowledge that their grief has a space and it should be acknowledged and talked about.
You also, in your paper, draw from the concept of death guilt. Can you tell us what that felt like for you and how does it feel now in retrospect?
Grieving parent feels that, why did their child have to die? Why wasn't it them? There's this the survivor guilt as well. You expect the parent to die first. When the child dies first, it creates a very strange disbalance. Something unexpected, though somewhere in the back of everyone's mind, that fear is there. So after pregnancy, postpartum depression is also something that is not talked about in
Yeah.
our society, and that is also very real, and it can go on for years. So when the child dies after that, if you're suffering from postpartum, it just makes it even more accentuated and worse.
You've spoken about unspoken silence around the death of an infant, often imposed by others around you, family, relatives. Tell us about this silence. What does it feel like?
It's very deadening. it's also very, suffocating. The people that I interviewed for my PhD, many times the interview process was the only way where they had actually spoken completely about the experience from the moment of the death, to maybe the rights that were involved or lack of rights, and the fact that they just haven't had the space or the person to talk so freely with. Because, people in their attempt to help you will say things like, it was meant to be, or, this was karma, this, the child was only meant to be for here for so long, they've got moksha, and all these things, they don't help a parent. I find that, most of the parents that I interviewed and myself also, hearing these things didn't help me. They made it worse. And if I would speak about my child, it would be like, no, no, let's talk about something else. So people would silence you.
And I want to specify there is a difference between a silence that is imposed on the parent at the time, and there is silence that comes out of choice of the parent,
Yes,
not wanting
yes,
to talk about it. And I think you mentioned it that it comes at a later stage where you, out of choice, don't want to talk too much about it to people who wouldn't understand, right?
right.
My question to you is, looking back, what is it that others could have done better?
I would say that, just letting them know that they're there if and when they are ready to talk about it, or they're just there. There doesn't have to be a conversation, and they feel the loss for them. They can't understand it probably because they haven't experienced it. Even acknowledging that is very important. When people are trying to be helpful, they say, I understand your loss. How can you understand a loss when you yourself haven't experienced it? And especially a child loss. When there's a grieving parent and someone is saying, I lost my pet who was just like a child to me, then I find it's not very helpful.
In one of our chats, Bharti, you brought up how infants, at least in India, cannot be cremated and need to be buried. In fact, mothers are discouraged from even being part of that ritual. Can you tell us a little of what you personally went through and how that moment shaped you moving forward?
Especially in the Hindu culture, infant and a child below a certain age, they're not cremated. They're supposed to be buried. I did not know this when I lost my child, but when I went to the crematorium, I was told, and first of all, I was supposed to not go. I was discouraged to go. I said, I will go, and no one can stop me. I think I took my stand right at the beginning that don't tell me what I can or cannot do. It's my child, and I will take her to her final resting space. So, but then when we went there, it was that, she was supposed to be buried. And they said, dig up a hole anywhere in the corner near the wall. I said, no, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to. And I could see stray dogs there, right? And of course, there are vultures and eagles flying around these spaces. I was like, there'd be rats. I don't know what. I said, I'm not going to bury my child like this. I chose to cremate her. After the cremation, which, for a little infant took a long time, and I refused to leave till she was, when the process is considered done enough for you to leave. When we were leaving, there was a woman, and she was muttering something, and I didn't quite understand what she was saying, and she kept asking for money. It did register to me why she's asking for money. I mean, I'm coming from the cremation. Later, after like 10 minutes or so, it dawned on me that she's asking me for money because I cremated my child. So that means I must have done something wrong. And it was a girl child. So I must have killed my child. And that's why I'm cremating her to get rid of the body. And that's where I broke down. I said, is it not enough that I had to cremate her? That there are all, this complete stranger. That was something that was there with other people also who didn't know me. And there was a silence in the family. There are many people who don't even know I lost a child till I've brought it up. And that I mean in the immediate extended family, where my aunts and uncles, they're like, oh, and these are elder people, how could they not have known? Or is it something that they blanked out? They all knew I had a child, I gave birth. It's just like, suddenly, I mean, a human being has not existed. Mm.
Or, on the other hand, certain family members feel that not talking about that loss would help, especially a young mother, move on quickly. But does it? What is the advice that you would give people around a young parent? How do people around them help them?
Acknowledging that it's a big loss and they're not responsible for it. Showing that, yes, you loved your child. It's unfortunate this happened.
Mm. That's the other thing, guilt. We spoke about death guilt, but there's the element of guilt that keeps coming up in on family occasions where you're made to feel guilty about the loss of a child. This is one thing that has stood out, in conversations with many, many parents that I've had recently, leading to
Hmm.
this discussion during weddings or when another child's birthday comes along, and it's that element of guilt that is covertly
Over.
expressed.
It is covertly expressed, and there are these glances. I used to call them, the way a person looks at you. These glances, they were piercing. They're not saying anything, right? But they're looking at you differently. And
Judgmental almost.
very judgmental. Firstly, if you've lost an infant, it'd be like, did you birth the child? Are you sure you took care? These kinds of things also come up a lot, and it'll come out multiple times. It doesn't end. Even a parent, who thinks they have reached a certain level or they've grieved a bit, it just gets triggered, someone somewhere, or you might watch something or read something, and they're all triggers. One should find a way to express, be it through talking, be it through writing, be it through creating something, through doing some kind of service, going to an orphanage, maybe. Each person has to find their own way.
No one also
Yeah.
speaks about the change in family dynamics, whether it's within marriage, whether it's relationship with in-laws, even your own parents. There is a sudden shift in dynamics. What happened in your case?
They were subtle because it was Mother's Day and my mother's being wished, right? My sister's being wished. Other people are being wished Mother's Day. I said, I get to be wished Mother's Day just because my child is not alive? Was I not a mother? No? And that was very difficult for people around me to take because I was expressing that. I cremated my child. I'm also a mother. Dynamics change because, again, it's that silence part. So, and when you break that silence, it's very difficult for other people. And the parent, instead of grieving their grief and taking care of themselves, they start taking care of other people. So then they don't have a space or avenue, even with people that they're close to, because they don't want to upset them. So they keep it inside, and that seems to manifest in many ways, usually through some kind of illness, high BP, or there is some manifestation because you're not getting the chance to express your emotions. So your body will find a way to take it out.
I want to specifically talk about the relationship with the spouse, even if it
Uh,
is something that both the spouses have gone through. And here I want to acknowledge the fact that fathers also have a way of grieving, and it's completely different from the way mothers do, right?
yeah.
Perhaps one would argue that mothers are able to talk about it more openly, but fathers are not even encouraged to do that. How did you both, in during that time, how did you and your husband express that grief differently?
We drifted apart. I separated, but initially it actually brought us together because we were able to understand. the loss, but there were other issues involved. So it wasn't only the grieving of a child. There were multiple issues, but they became accentuated. But there are couples where loss creates problem in a marriage that has not had any problem.
In fact, Bharti, I was telling you about a friend of mine
Yes,
who's
yes,
lost their 30-year-old child recently. First of all, a parent's grief is a parent's grief, regardless of
yes,
the age they lose their child. Whether, and here I would like to say, whether it's a 16-day-old infant or a 30-year-old child, grief is grief. But the reason I bring it up is an important point that their therapist made to them, both husband and wife, is
mm,
try and not grieve in isolation, which I thought was
yes,
such a powerful thing to say. But to
yes,
grieve and involve each other in your grief. And that
yes,
resonated so much because spouses tend to do that in grief, hold it, and then try and process it on their own, or they try and be there for the other person without resolving their own. And to have a stronger foundation going forward, you've got to try and do it together, involve
yes,
each other. Otherwise, this is where spouses begin to drift and grow
yes.
separately.
It also, helps evolve the relationship. Like some of the parents that I spoke to, So let's say there was a father who was very strict. There was one who lost 25-year-old son to a bike accident. So he was very strict. He was always a very strict father. His problem later became, was I too strict? So he was missing the fact that he missed out on getting to know his child the way his wife knows. So that brought them together, that he used to ask his wife, so what was he like on this aspect, or what would he think here? And he started expressing his emotions, especially the fact that, he was too strict. Maybe he should have been, more approachable.
Yeah.
He missed out. The mother became stronger, and the father, would cry and he would break down, and he didn't care now about who is in front of him. So
Mm,
that changed, for a person who was so in control and, like almost like an army man kind of a demeanor, that you can't show your weakness.
mm,
And he didn't care what another person's reaction was. Fathers, I find, because mothers usually tend to have a closish relationship with the child, no matter what the gender or the age. Fathers, maybe not. So there are fathers who are also very close and very hands-on. Your personality changes. So let's say if you're a very giving person and you never say no, like for me personally, I was like that, was the caretaker, taking care of everyone else. And I realized that, no one's taking care of me. So I need to do it for myself. So I started saying no. That was difficult for other people. Like, you've changed,
mm.
you've become difficult, you don't listen anymore. I said, I don't need to listen to all. So I became very adamant that ways, not only marriage, but other relationships also, friendships and relatives also. It brought a distance, but I have no regrets.
It's important what you just said, Bharti. I just want to reiterate it. In
Mm,
several parents that I've spoken to, also leading to this discussion, and now that you mention it, there is a certain
mm,
strength that suddenly comes to a parent, especially moms that I've spoken to who lose their children. There's a certain strength that appears, which allows them to put their foot down, which allows
yeah,
them to stand up for themselves because,
yeah,
loss that they have dreaded has happened
yeah,
already. The
yeah.
worst has happened. So I don't think they think that there could be anything worse. So it's
It
time now
can't.
to demand what they are worth.
There's nothing else that can happen that's going to be as bad. The mothers that I spoke to, their relationship with their in-laws or their husbands or other, people, they're like, no, this is going to happen and this is the way it's going to be done.
So, Bharti, during this time, let's bring up mental health issues like depression, which I'm assuming on my part that you did undergo. Tell us what to expect and what you went through and how you came out of it.
See, depression was there. I mean, I lost my daughter very early, right? So I was also going through postpartum depression.
Mm.
after childbirth. Since I'm also a psychologist studying psychoanalysis about how there is a wish, that your child is not alive, all those kinds of theories. To me, being a student of psychology and a practitioner made it more difficult also because there's so many things I'm supposed to be understanding, and I do understand, but how do I take care of myself? I can take care of another person who's grieving, but how do I take care of my own grief?
And here is a point. You are a practicing clinical psychologist, and yet you were finding it so difficult.
I mean, if I spoke to someone, it was like they themselves were lost, that they didn't know how to help. Even practicing psychologists, therapists, they're
Yes.
like, they just don't know what to say to help me. In the end, I would end up being holding them and dealing with their shock at my loss. I
Mm.
did find later, it's a website where strangers who understood the loss also responded, So if I wrote something, they would respond, or someone else wrote something and I would respond. So it was an interaction that was helping me.
How did you heal?
I don't know if I've healed, right? I think I'm still healing. To me, breaking that silence, not only for myself, but for other people that I see and people I know who have experienced. And it's not only the loss of a child, any loss. I realized that there's so many similarities, but there's something different about loss of a child. But loss in itself or grief in itself, even imagined grief, that is also very real for the person. So it helped me explore that it's vaster and one is not alone.
This is the reason why I began Zen-Brain in the first place, to normalize conversations which are otherwise not had. A couple of years ago, when I saw my friend going through what she did, I didn't know how to help her. And
Yeah.
but I think conversations like this could help somebody who's currently going through it. So, in fact, I would urge all of you watching, if at all, you're obviously watching this because you've gone through it, or you have a loved one who's currently going through it. So do pass it on to people you think could learn from Bharti's story. Bharti, I want to discuss the other child.
Yeah.
You lost a 16-day infant first, and then you had a son. Were you fearful? Were you anxious all the time? What was that like?
I was very distant. I've lost one child. This child is also going to die. If not right now, in a little while, but I'm going to go through the same. So I was very distant. I would do the needful. Plus, again, it was postpartum depression also again. And of course, the fact that I had lost my child previous to that. Because that fear of loss was very alive in me.
Fear of loss is real. So you were talking about imagined grief.
I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't deserve this love.
How did you move forward with it?
It came to a point that it is not fair to my child. What has my child done?
How old was he when you realized this?
On and off, I would keep realizing it. But I think when he was about a little more than a year old, I was like, this is not fair to him. So then I was more present. He was always a very happy child. And I also somewhere told myself that possibility is there. It can happen again, but I'll deal with it when it happens.
Did
And
writing this paper, the thesis, help you understand your own grief? Were there moments of clarity or even catharsis while you worked on it?
yes, they were. And I somehow, like with the interviews, the people that I spoke to, it was strange how, I was able to reach them quite effortless. During interviews, I would be also crying with them. So that connected us very differently. And there was not a single parent that I spoke to who didn't feel relieved with the interview process because somewhere it was the first time where they actually were able to speak.
What would be some of the key insights which gave you perspective about your own grief?
That's a
Say,
I'm just saying,
okay,
yeah,
let me ask you. Let me ask you.
yeah,
When we had a chat about the
discussion. Uh-huh.
last rites, that
Mm,
is something that has stood out for me as well because I wasn't aware, and neither were
mm,
you at the time when you
mm,
lost your Arushi.
mm,
That impacted you in many ways, that made you stand up for
mm.
your child, for yourself, against loved ones. So that was kind of a turning point, would you say? And did you find the last rites like a common theme amongst the other parents that you spoke to?
Most of the other parents that I spoke to, they weren't there for the last ride.
How did that impact them?
They still can't think about it. Think about it in the sense that they feel that they should have done something differently. So that stays. So if they were told not to go, they feel they should have go. They should have stood up for them. And not knowing, because for many of them, it wasn't spoken about. They don't know what happened. So they know where buried, how buried, who buried. So as part of my thesis, I had also gone, to the places where infants are buried. There are a lot of places near the Ghats where there are the Muslim burial spaces. There is a separate area in these spaces where Hindu children are buried also. Not only in the crematorium, but also in these spaces near the ghats. There is no marker there. That's something that stood out. There's no space where you can go to mourn your child. And you're not supposed to be mourning. So you don't have a photograph of your child. Most people don't keep. The people that I interviewed, they all have a picture. Some of them, it's like physically very apparently there.
Yeah.
And people will comment on, oh, who's this child? Oh, that's my son. What's he doing? Or, is he married? Or they'll be like, no, he is not in this world anymore, or he's dead. And it comes as a shock. The ones who already know will not comment, right? But the ones who suddenly see that, and many people tell them to remove these pictures. I have a portrait, it's a sketch of my daughter, which is very physically present. And with my child, I told him when he was slightly older, I said you had a sister because when he used to interact with girls, in the family or otherwise, friends, daughters, or, so people like, what if I had if I had a sister? I said, you did have a sister. So then later on, as he grew up, he would say, if Arushi Didi was alive, you know, then she would give me chocolates or she would do this. So it wasn't a taboo. So when we used to talk about it, other people around us would be like, this is not healthy. I said, this is healthy.
A while ago, we
Mm,
were sent an email, a lady who had miscarried her child, late stage miscarriage. The loss was real. It was a child.
yeah.
Just be encouraged to talk about it openly, to accept, to acknowledge that there was a loss and that she was grieving is important. To be allowed that grieving space.
Even for couples, who let's say are going through in vitro fertilization, each time they do not conceive, which happens quite a bit, it's a loss. Is that not real?
It's interesting that you should bring up our Indian culture, how we see death, how we see loss and grief as compared to the Western societies, especially losing an infant. It's a celebration of the life that was and constant acknowledgement. Even
Mm,
a person who has been diagnosed with terminal illness, for that person to be able to talk and accept and acknowledge that they are in the process of dying. I'm not
yes.
sure we have thoroughly acknowledged or accepted or embraced death. It's almost taboo to
No.
talk about it.
If there is a death, people turn up. There are women who will not go to the cremation ground, let's say, because in their culture it's not allowed. And there are people who will go. And in these spaces also, I find that people are so nosy. And they will ask all kinds of questions, why, how did it happen? I mean, who cares how did it happen? They'll be so, no, it shouldn't be done like this. It should be done. So I became very, with my
Different.
laws, I was like, don't interfere with.
Yeah,
No,
this
so I would be like vigilant about, all these wrongdoings that are happening. and not let them happen.
Bharti, what do you wish someone had told you way back in 2004 when Arushi passed away? And what would you say today to a mother holding grief that no one sees? And fathers?
Rely on your instinct.
Mm.
Stop explaining. Don't take responsibility of other people, be it a parent, be it a sibling or a friend. You need to take care of yourself. Then your spouse. As a couple, also focus on yourself and do whatever you can to find the help that you require.
As they say,
Some,
the oxygen
hmm,
mask on yourself first so that
yeah,
you can be a better help to others. On an ending note, Bharti, let me
yes.
ask you, a lot of parents still don't know what sudden infant death syndrome or SIDS is. As a mother who has seen her child go, what would you like to tell people about SIDS?
It happens even when you take all precautions. That guilt is there that, what could you have done differently to make sure that this doesn't happen? So there are no such possibilities. You have children who are born premature, who are in the hospital with incubators. They die with all the staff around because it's a matter of seconds. Even a doctor or healthcare professional would not. So that was something that saved me when my doctor told me that, even if she was here, you were here in the hospital and I was right there, I wouldn't have been able to save. That is important to know. You do all the precautions, but at the same time, it's a matter of seconds, and there's nothing that any parent can do.
And it's not
So,
your fault.
yeah.
If you're a parent and you have lost an infant to sudden infant death syndrome or SIDS, it is not your fault. Any last thoughts, Bharti, before we wind up?
I would say parents need to find their space to express their grief, not let it kill them from inside. And their child exists in their world.
And in your case, your son who's 20 right now, right?
Yes,
Arushi is still part of his life. So grief changes us, but as Bharti reminds us, it also connects us quietly, powerfully. Whether you've lost a child or you know of someone who has, I hope today's conversation helped you feel seen, noticed, acknowledged. I hope you feel permission to remember, to mourn, to celebrate, and to speak the name that many may have silenced in your world. If you know someone who needs to hear this conversation, please share it with them. Because healing doesn't come from fixing grief. You can never fix grief. It comes from giving it space. So until next time, take care of your heart and of those whose hearts are quietly breaking around you. And thank you, Bharti. Thank you for showing us what love looks like, even in its most silent form. Thank you, Bharti.
thank you, Shruti.